topic of gender pay equity is frequently mentioned in the news and social media. Too often we hear the negative stories, but here at the agency we also hear about employers who want to do the right thing, who want to identify and tackle any gender pay gaps in their organisation. And today we're very pleased to have with us Jodie Haydon from Viva Energy to tell us a bit about Viva Energy's pay equity journey. So thank you, Jodie, and welcome. Just so we can start off, can you tell us a bit about Viva Energy's story? What prompted it to take action for addressing gender pay equity?
Sure. So Viva Energy makes, imports and delivers fuel, lubricants, bitumen and chemicals Australia-wide. We provide or supply about a quarter of Australia's fuel needs. We've got 1,200 people that work for us, that are in manufacturing, that are at airports, filling up planes, at terminals, and then at our head office in Docklands in Melbourne. So we've been focusing on pay equity for quite some time now, nearly 10 years. However, our progress has been really slow. And about 4 years ago, we decided that we wanted to speed it up, amplify our efforts on pay equity so that we could start to reap the benefits. So we absolutely believe in all the research around the benefits of pay equity for the company, for our customers and for our employees. So it's really been the last 3 to 4 years where we've really got behind pay equity, understanding what the underlying systemic issues are and doing something about them.
That's great. And what process has Viva Energy followed to, identify any pay gaps and to take action?
So we analysed our data, every single element of our data. So not just base pay, but bonus, superannuation, overtime, allowances. We do it regularly, so about 4 times a year. We also have what we call a gender dashboard, which covers every people metric, if you like. So promotions, resignations, employee engagement, and we look at that through a gender lens as well to understand what that data is telling us about the differences between males and females in our organisation.
That's great. And can you tell us about any particular initiative or action that Viva Energy may have taken as part of this process?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we try and do when we're analysing the data is understand what the underlying causes might be. And 2 areas that we've really focused on are our operational roles and superannuation. So we know to get to a 0 gender pay gap at our organisation, we need to get 50% males and females. We've got hundreds of operational roles, and the majority of those until recently had been males, their traditional manufacturing roles. So we worked really hard at trying to recruit differently, assess differently, think about how the roles could be structured so we could attract more women into those operational roles. These are shift roles, manufacturing our product or working at our terminals. And then the other area that we found when we were looking at our data was we had a gap on superannuation balances between men and women. So nothing like the retirement balances in Australia, but a gap nonetheless. And we know that one of the contributing factors to that gap is because women have time out on parental leave. Often there's a component of unpaid parental leave. And then at Viva Energy, the majority do return to a part-time work schedule. So to compensate for that, we introduced an initiative late last year whereby we will continue to pay full-time superannuation for parental leave, including unpaid components. And if the parent chooses to come back to work in a part-time capacity, we'll continue paying full-time superannuation as well for 5 years after the birth of the baby. And we'll pay that superannuation at 12% as well. So we know that that will actually reduce the impact of having time out to have babies and from working part-time as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And maybe it's early days yet, but have you seen any outcomes or results either from doing your pay gap analysis or from any particular initiatives or actions that you've taken?
Sure. So we have set ourselves targets as well. It's one element of our strategy, not the only one. And we have actually seen progress against those targets. So we set ourselves a target of 50% of our senior leaders would be female by the end of 2020. So we're currently at 40%, so we've got 10% to go. We're well on track. We also had a target for women in all levels of management. That was 40%, and we're currently at 29% there. So again, we're well on track. They're short-term targets, but important to show that we're actually making progress and we're measuring what we're doing. And the other one is our overall representation of women has actually increased. We're now at 26% too. I said earlier we measure our gender pay gap on a regular basis, and we are very excited about the launch of your data next week, the official pay gap, because we've been reducing ours year on year, and we're expecting that, well, we know from our analysis that our pay gap on last year's data is in single digits, which is a great improvement. So yeah, we're looking forward to actually seeing the official release of the data where it's indicated there.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that we've got really, they're the numbers and the stats, which are important, but we have really good support from the people in our organisation on making progress in this area. So people understand why it's important, they care about it, they love the different initiatives that we are taking, they loved the superannuation initiative. I had probably, hundreds of people tell me how proud they were of that, to try and make super fairer for parents. Our people were rapt that we were awarded the Employer of Choice by the agency as well. So our whole organisation is really quite behind this and is also quite excited by it too, which I think is also progress.
That is really great to hear, because I actually was going to touch on how your employees have reacted to these initiatives, but it sounds like they've been really on board and happy with it.
Yeah, I think we always talk about it from the business case. So we always talk about what it means to our organisation, so the impact of having a gender balanced workforce can have on the company's performance, on innovation. We try and link it into our strategy as well. We know that 50% of our customers are also female too, so we always start with why we're doing this. And because we've had some really good outcomes and we've celebrated those with people, I think that's made people feel proud and also spurs you on to do more as well.
So that all sounds really positive, Jodie. Just wondering, have there been any challenges along the way in your journey?
So our progress, as I mentioned, hasn't been anywhere near fast enough. So that's been challenging as well. We have good support though from the organisation, because people understand the why between gender equality and what it means for the company, what it means for the culture, and what it means for our customer. But some of the challenges have been really around thinking about how to do things quite differently and challenging ourselves on, do you actually need to have this type of experience, or can we look at transferable experience? So what skills are actually required rather than looking for the experience? If I think about probably one of the most challenging areas to attract women would be our Geelong refinery, which is a manufacturing facility. The roster is a shift work roster. We had to really think quite differently there and spend a lot of time with the operational managers around how could we structure these roles quite differently to be able to attract more women. And some of the things, just how do we go out and look for a different type of profile worker. So, some of the obvious things like doing our advertisements quite differently. So looking at our language, which I know is quite common now, having photos of men and women on the advertisements, and then actually looking at the selection process again. So are we looking for the skills? So what's required for the job rather than the experience? So problem solving, teamwork, propensity for safety. Now, it seems quite obvious now when I look back on it, but at the time it was very different to what we had always done, and it required lots of conversations, lots of creative thinking, keeping our eye on what was our ultimate goal, but could we do things quite differently? And I think that's been probably one of the challenges throughout our whole experience with gender equality. Is we know what the outcome is, but you do really need to think quite differently and challenge yourself on how you can recruit differently, select differently, promote differently as well, and convince other people as well to think outside the box.
Yeah, that's great. Another question, and this is a more general question, is that we're seeing more employers analysing their pay data, and that's really great. But we also see there's a bit of a gap between doing the analysis and taking action. So I guess I'm just asking, would you hazard a guess as to why that might be? And also for Viva Energy, how did you go about working out what the right thing or right action to take for your organisation?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So if I start with a couple of ideas, maybe, I think you do need to analyse every component of your data. So analysing just the base pay is not enough. And if I look at our situation, if we look at our base pay data only, then we would say, well, we don't have an issue. But then when you start to look at all the items of data, then you can see where our gaps are. So comprehensive analysis of every element, I think, is important. I think you also need to look at any change within your organisation that changes people. So any resignations, promotions, new joiners, restructures, new jobs, that can all have an impact on your gender pay gap. So you need to manage them individually and collectively as well. So it's things like looking at the starting salaries of new joiners compared to existing staff, for example. And I think there's probably still, sadly, a little bit of confusion that time will solve this challenge, with more women graduating from universities and dual income families, that it's just a matter of time. But of course, I think the research shows that time's not going to make the change here. So for us, I've mentioned the data ad nauseum, but we have quite a comprehensive strategy that sits on top of our understanding of the data and the underlying causes of our gaps. It's comprehensive in that it touches on leadership, so building leadership capability, leaders who can create an inclusive culture, one that's focused on outcomes, high-performing delivery, not on things like time in the office. Flexible working is obviously a big part of the overall strategy as well. How do we really entrench that? And again, be creative and think differently around flexible working. We also look at targets. I mentioned that's an element of the strategy, and we also have some development for emerging female leaders as well. So it's quite a comprehensive strategy which is designed to address each of those underlying causes that we've picked up from the analysis of our data.
That's great. And we always at the agency emphasise the importance of taking that strategic approach that you just mentioned. So Jodie, just one last question. Do you have, from all your experience, any learnings or tips you might want to share for any employers who may just be starting on their journey for pay equity?
Yeah, sure. So I would say start where you can, go where the interest is. If you can tie the business case into your organisation's strategy or your organisation's purpose or vision, then that's positive, and that should allow better traction. Always start with the business case. We always talk about the business case rather than it being the right thing to do, which of course it is, but you don't need to rely on that. There's a very strong business case around it. And then I would start with where the passion is. So find a leader who's got some energy and some interest in there. Know where your gaps are, know where to start. So don't necessarily start with boiling the ocean, but understand what your data is telling you and what's behind it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jodie, for your valuable insights.
Thanks, Helen.